Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for spending part of your day with me on this Friday. I'm Greg Swartz, the big man in the big man we dram equation. I don't have a dram with me today. Usually I give in to temptation, even though it's early for me when we do these things, 1 o'clock in California. But today, actually, after this, I have quite a long drive ahead of me, so I will delay my gratification. But, one of the things I'm really excited about this week, though, is my guest. This week, I'm going to be talking with Crafty Field, and I'm going to let him come in here in a moment and tell you a little bit about himself. But one of the reasons that I'm excited is because we kind of know each other through Rachel McNeil, and have, I'm really interested to share with some of the things he's doing. So I'm going to bring him in now, and we will let him explain himself better than I can. Hello.
G'day, Greg. How are you, mate?
G'day. Thank you so much for getting up early and joining me here today. I really appreciate it.
Early. It's 6 o'clock in the morning here, but it's still, that's a breakfast dram.
I'd normally, man, I'd be all over it. Yesterday I was lucky enough, since I'm in the Bay Area in California right now, I don't know if you know Sam Filmus, Impex, but they released their independent bottling line this week, and I got to taste through the whole first launch, which was quite a nice session for me. Yeah.
Very nice.
Well, so, like I said in the introduction, you can do a much better job than I can. Can you tell everyone a little bit about who you are and what it is you're doing with your distillery? Because I think it's a really cool story and it fits so nicely with our film.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, okay. All right. So my real name is Craig Field. My nickname is Crafty. And my distillery is called Works Distillery. So many years ago, a distiller decided to call me Crafty, and I thought, I don't like the sound of that. That's going to get me in trouble. But it stuck. Ever since then, it's stuck. So I actually introduced myself as Crafty. So where am I? I'm in Australia, so way down south, and there's a city called Sydney on the eastern seaboard, and so I am 2.5 hours inland seaboard from Sydney, and a little spot on the map at about 800 metres above sea level called Capity. So I have a wee little shed, 120 square metre shed, back of a pub, back at Capity, and I go between Capity and Sydney generally every week. Come down here, mill, brew, distill, barrel, do my cellar door, do my thing. So yeah, that's the short version of Craftworks Distillery.
And are you entirely a one-man operation?
Pretty much. It's a family operation. So it's myself and my wife. My wife does the bottling and keeps me in check. And I do pretty well everything else, mill, brew, distill, the whole shebang. I do have a good friend of mine called Todd Pointer, the Todd, and he comes down on a regular basis. He's my right-hand man. Not on the payroll. I'm not even on the payroll at this stage. So, but he does get paid by whiskey, and he is he's my creative partner for sure.
So can you tell me a little bit about your whiskey? I've yet to actually try it myself, so I'd love to hear a little bit about your whiskey and your approach to whiskey.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so let's start with my biggest influences. So I'm a massive Bruichladdich fan. I started early 2000 drinking, and the very first distillery that I became aware of was Bruichladdich. So I was exposed to the passion of Bruichladdich, and that is what turbocharged my interest into whiskey. That ultimately led to me having my own little craft distillery here. But I'm also heavily influenced by the likes of Westland Distillery in the US and Corsair Distillery. They're the two main ones. I was very fascinated with the approach of taking beer and distilling beer. So I thought, okay, this is something a little bit different. And so it was actually Corsair, their Alt Whiskies book, which was the trigger which gave me the confidence to go straight in and start working with a mash bill, which was built on base malts and specialty malts. So I started with a stout beer recipe, minus hops, minus oats, just straight malt, and started laying barrels like that, which was a pretty ballsy move when I look back now, with no real distilling experience, and to go straight into that. But the Corsair book gave me the confidence that yes, this can be done. So went straight into it. And then I started working with a local craft maltster, which is in the same state as me, and just got some fantastic malts, freshly roasted malts and base malts, and just started from there. I have tried other recipes, other mash bills, early days. I've just done a smoked one where we took wood shavings from cooperage floor, and we used that to smoke some malt. So in a very Australian way, it was, let's give it a go. So talked to the cooperage, got some shavings, talked to the maltster, said, yeah, let's give it a go. So we gave it a go, smoked it up, and made some whiskey and put it in a barrel.
And how did it turn out? Or do you not know yet?
No, it's still new make. It's in a barrel.
Okay.
Beautiful flavors. Lots of smoky, bacon, biscuity type aromas when we're milling it and mashing it. By the time we got to the second distillation, the flavor was a lot more subtle. So it was a lot more subtle than I expected. So we're going back in later in the year. We're doing it again. And this time we'll increase the smoke time level and really try and beef it up. But what I actually did do is I ended up blending the new make with some of my, it's called an I Am, and it's the stout-based approach. So I blended with a small amount of that and just got this very rich, slightly smoky, chocolatey type new make. So I'm a big believer in you build complexity at the new make stage. It does actually carry through. Barley does actually carry through flavors. So yeah,
my hotel room phone is ringing. There you go.
Greg's away.
I'm still here. Just didn't want that ringing constantly. Yeah. That was a new one for me. The idea of a landline, I had forgotten that was even a thing. So, have you, since you're clearly still experimenting really in big capital E ways, have you settled on a core style, a core range of any sort yet? Or are you still, is every batch completely unique?
No, at this stage, Greg, we're very, very small. I mean, my output this year will probably be about 5,000 litres, which is infinitesimal. We are a very, very small craft distillery, and at this stage, we're still finding our feet, very much so. The I Am signature profile is something which is established. So I Am, give you some idea. That's the bottle. Oh, nice. And this is a combination of wet filled casks and heavy charred casks, and one was from a local winemaker, and the other two were from a cooperage that I use down in South Australia. A good friend of mine who does takes Shiraz barrels and fills them with Oloroso sherry, seasons the wood, and then really heavy char on them. So it was a combination of those two barrels with the stout-based approach new make. So it's a big, rich, complex whiskey. So,
wow, that sounds unique and rich. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. It's very, very pleased with it because that's technically our first release, and we picked up a bronze medal in London Spirits comp for it. So as first release, we were very, very chuffed with that. And then we went on to pick up a silver in the Tokyo Spirits competition. So not bad for a 120 square metre shed in the middle of nowhere, the back of a pub. So,
That's great.
So yeah, so that's one flavor profile which I called I Am, and that's an ongoing one. We will have a smoked profile, which will be based on taking wood shavings and smoking it as opposed to a peat type approach. And the next one that I'm working on is it's a lighter expression, so less of a wood influence, more of a grain influence, and exploring that. And we haven't actually started that yet because we're actually starting a mead project, distilling mead project very, very shortly, which is super exciting as well.
I never thought of or heard of distilling mead before.
It's not. It's definitely not common. It's very expensive, and the reason I can do it is because I've hooked up with a craft meadster mate, and so he's making the mead. He's got access to the honey, and we're deep diving. We're going to be exploring different honey types and cask some mead, cask some distilled mead. Very much a learning. To give you some idea, we got onto a webinar that was the US Honey Board, and it was about honey spirits. So
wow.
at 2 a.m. in the morning, Paul and I are watching it and just sucking up information about honey spirits. Different. Anyway, I digress.
No. This is fat. I mean, it's funny. More often than not, when distilleries, once they become more and more established and kind of into their routines, their experiments get more and more. They go between 4 and 6. They don't go between 1 and 10. The sort of scale of the things they want to try. And clearly you're really still playing it big, which is cool. I dig it. And I would love to try distilled mead. I think I've only ever tried mead once.
It's an interesting drink.
Yeah. So we have a question here in the chat from Mark Pruitt. How do you feel the Australian climate impacts the maturing process and ultimately the flavors in the product? That's a great question.
It is. It's a really great question. The thing that we say here in Australia is we're making Australian whiskey, and we're not trying to make Scotch. We're not trying to make bourbon, and our climates definitely have a big play on the maturation of our whiskey. So I get down to, I'll do it in Celsius. I get down to about -7 in winter, and I can go up into the late 30s, punch into the early 40s in summer. And even within the course of a day, you can have a hot day and you can have a cool night. So we see a lot of spirit movement within the barrel. You actually can see it. You can see the barrels, hissing and groaning sometimes, particularly where we are too. We're 800 meters above sea level. And so behind us is a plain, the Western Plains. So we get a lot of storm fronts that blow off the plains. And those storms come in, and those low pressure systems, they really put your pressure into your barrel. So what you see is you can see a lot of flavor complexity built in a relatively short period of time because of the expansion and the contraction of that spirit and that extraction that's coming out of the barrel. So where we are, that's one climate. I've got a mate who's 2.5 hours down the road. It's a completely different climate. He gets up into the high 40s during summer, and he's got a tin shed roof, so his barrels cook totally different whiskies. So there's no one whiskey type that I can see in Australia. Everyone's making different styles of whiskey, and their climate's definitely having an impact.
That's, the other day I was listening to a podcast with Jared Himstadt from Balcones Distillery in Texas.
Yep.
And, last year Texas had a huge, big freeze, which Texas doesn't normally do that, and he was talking about how they weren't used to that much weather influence on their casks. Their casks mature very quickly because Texas is pretty hot, but this was a whole different thing. And I loved the metaphor he used was, he said, it's like wanting your tea to be ready quicker and you squeeze the tea bag. Yes, it will finish quicker, but it's not good for the tea. It's going to get too much tannins, and it's not ideal, but it gets you to a different place, and I thought that was really interesting. I never thought about it in those terms before. The big squeeze.
Absolutely. You can make a big whiskey, and you've got to be very, very careful that you're not extracting too much tannin. So you watch your barrels. You watch them like a hawk. You can recask as well. That's another thing. You'll find Australian whiskies. The best way to describe it, I think, is when Australia red wine broke onto the world market, it was like no other red wine out there. And people in the wine industry were going, what the hell is this? This is not what we expect. Now you've got Australian winemakers that are going to Italy and teaching Italians how to make wine. So it's very interesting. Australian whiskies are still relatively young on the scene. Some big, bold flavors. But at the same time, there is subtlety starting to come through as well. There's we've got whiskies now that are 15 years old plus, so we're actually getting some age on whiskies, and you're getting a different style of whiskey. So as the industry matures, the flavour profiles are changing as well.
I mean, the Australian whiskies I've loved. I mean, I have a few bottles at home, and then I mean, in our film, we went to Australia because Jim McEwen helped set up the Cape Byron distillery in Byron Bay.
Yep.
So we went there, and we actually watched them run spirit for the first time. They were already making gin, but we watched them run whiskey spirit.
Wow.
And I've had that whiskey now. It's now 2 years old, and I've had that whiskey, and it's great. It's got a lot of. You can see what it's going to be. I mean, it was 2 years in a week when I tasted it. So but you can see where it's going to go, and I mean, I think it's safe to say Jim McEwen knows what he's doing. So he was sort of really excited because it was something he'd never done before, completely different, and and obviously that's a very different climate even than you.
Yeah, I was going to say that must have been fascinating from Jim's perspective because totally different climate, very, very humid, tropical. Still would have run completely different. It would have been fascinating to watch him under those conditions and see how it worked. He was working with Eddie, wasn't he? On that. Yeah. Yep. Eddie Brook. Yeah.
And they used the same still, and they only have one still, at least at the time. They may have two stills now, but they were using the same still for washing spirit runs. And they, I know they were aging the whiskey it was underground. I mean, the warehouse was underneath the distillery. It was kind of built into the hillside. So,
you know why? Because their angel share probably would have been 20%.
Yeah. Yeah. But then it's funny. We went to when we were there. It's the only time I've ever been to Australia. After that, we headed north because my friend. Okay, so this is funny. This is a small world kind of thing. I know you through Rachel McNeil.
Yep.
I know Liam Hughes through Rachel McNeil. Liam Hughes at the Glasgow Distillery had invited me to go spend a week working there before we shot the film.
Right.
At the time, the head distiller there was Lachlan McIntyre, who's Australian. When I was working there, he'd already told me that he had given notice he was leaving and moving back to Australia to start a rum distillery outside of Bundaberg. And so he's got a still in a shed on a biodynamic sugarcane farm in the middle of big industrial sugarcane land. And it's funny to fly the drone over it and see the biodynamic field versus the sort of industrial corporate field. It's all the sort of perfect rows of corduroy sugarcane, and then this sort of one field with just kind of crazy banana. But that was proper hot there when we were there because that was February, and we were like I said, right outside of Bundaberg.
Yeah, that sort of sums up the Australian ethos to distilling. Is very much give it a go, try things, don't be shy. We've now got, I think it's last count about 350 odd distilleries, I think, somewhere between 300 and 350 distilleries in Australia. And they are making everything and anything. It is a massive boom over here in the craft distilling space for sure.
Wow, I had no idea it was that many.
Oh, no, it is. Well, Tasmania, which is known as the spiritual heartland of Australian whiskey, I think at last count, and it's a small island, there's about 60 odd distilleries now in Tasmania. 60 in Tasmania. Wow. I remember not that long ago, there was about 15. It's crazy what's going on down there.
It's funny. I have never tried Lark, but I was gifted a bottle of it, and I've still never tried it because the woman who gave it to myself and one of our producers as a gift, she gave it to us to share, and then I haven't seen him because of the pandemic since. So I haven't gotten any of it yet.
Yeah.
I've had some other of the more well-known Australian distilleries when I was there and here. I have a couple. I think I have a bottle of Starward at home right now.
Yeah. Well, there's a huge success story, Starwood, and how Starwood's now punching well above its weight over in the US. It's great to see. A lot of people watch that and are really excited.
Yeah, this shows you what a whiskey nerd I am. The reason I have the current bottle of Starward I have is because my local supermarket had it all of a sudden last week.
Wow.
And my wife had sent me to the supermarket to pick up, I don't know, milk or something. And I came home and I had a bottle of whiskey. And she said, "Why did you buy more whiskey?" Because I have a lot of whiskey. I said they're selling Starward at the grocery store now. I had to buy it. I want them to keep doing that. So I had to buy it. So, but yeah, it's funny. I really like some of the flavors that I've tried in Australian whiskeys. They come through, because of the climate, I think, in a lot of ways, and I think they get big and bold quickly, or more quickly anyway.
There's a lot of use of wine casks over here too. Yeah, we use a lot of fortifieds, but getting 40-year-old plus fortifieds now is quite hard because not a lot of people drink port and sherry. You're seeing more and more wine casks coming in. I mean, we've got exceptionally good wines and access to good wine casks, so it's not uncommon.
We got a question here from Facebook user. People, I try to explain this every week, and it's not anyone's fault. It's frankly, it's Facebook's fault. If people ask us questions through our Facebook group, it just shows up as Facebook user because they have an expectation of privacy. If they ask us through the Facebook page, their name appears. So whoever it says, "I'm sorry, I don't know your name," but they're asking, is it easy and or cheap to get a license to distill in Australia compared with the UK?
Good question. There's a process you go through here. So it's illegal to home distill in Australia. So what you've got to do is you've basically got to go to the Australian Taxation Office and make a case for your license. So you've got to show that you are capable of producing a product and managing your inventory because they want their excise. That's the key thing. They want their excise payments. So you've got to make a case, and if you make a case, then you can get what's called a wholesaler's producer's license off them, or actually a license to own a still. That's the first thing. And then it's working with local councils, which can be quite challenging because all councils are different. And this is one of the frustrations we have here is there's no cookie cutter solution to opening up a distillery. You have to work at a very local level with your council, alleviate their concerns and make a good case. But is it easy to open a distillery? It's still relatively easy. It's costly. You've got to know what you're doing. I built my distillery. I call it on the smell of an oily rag. So secondhand pumps, hosing that's not uniform, old wine tanks. I'm probably one of the last of the smell of the oily rag distilleries now. Now you see distilleries built with brand new shiny equipment, serious money, 2.5 mil Australian sort of set up a distillery and consultancy. That's the direction it's gone. It's definitely moved into a more professional level as opposed to a backyard person who says, "I'm going to open up a distillery," and away I go.
That's interesting. About 10 years ago, I read, it's funny, I'm in Oakland, California right now, and I read a story about Oakland about 10 years ago that I thought was both funny and interesting. And what was going on at the time was Oakland was one of the first places in the country to start letting people sell and buy marijuana.
Right.
And the dispensaries in Oakland, the marijuana dispensaries, without being asked, without any laws in place, they started shipping tax payments to the government and they basically were operating under the idea that once the government gets a taste of the tax, they're never going to shut us down. As long as they're, getting a piece of it, they're getting their excise, And the funny thing is that now it's the whole state. Now there's 20 some states where they've legalized it. It's very interesting that idea that was very kind of ahead of the curve. I think that, they give, once they get that sweet tax money, they're not going to ever shut them down.
Now it's a boom industry.
Yeah, absolutely it is. Mark Pruitt asked a follow-up question. What whiskey do you drink personally other than your own? And do those flavor profiles influence yours?
Yeah, very, very much so. Pardon me. I've always got Bruichladdich on the shelf. I've not had a Bruichladdich bottle I did not like. Now, whether that's because I'm just so connected to Bruichladdich, the history of Bruichladdich, the resurrection of Bruichladdich, I should say. When I opened my distillery, when I bottled my first release, so I cracked a bottle of Black Arts, and it was a little ceremony for me in the shed. I've actually got a little wee Bruichladdich shrine tucked away with a lot of blue stuff and barrel tags and things like that. So Bruichladdich, I'm waiting patiently for Waterford. I've got my own little podcast, and we interviewed Ned Gahan, head distiller from Waterford. Absolutely love everything that Waterford's doing. Have tasted Waterford, blown away by Whiskey Terroir and how they're demonstrating it, and that's something super exciting here in Australia as well. So Waterford, I've got that a little bit, not a lot, but I want more. I like a range of whiskeys. So when I first started, I was a big peat head. I started with Isla, everything Isla. I just loved it with a passion. I would say Lagavulin 16. That sits on the shelf. That's a desert island dram for sure. Big fan of Port Charlotte, Bruichladdich. But at the same time, I like a good sherried whiskey. I'm a huge Glendronach fan as well. So variety is the spice of life. And then I've got Australian whiskies. I've got Lime Burners sitting on the shelf right now. Blackgate, local distillery, Aisling. Here's a story. So the still behind me is built by a guy who he's got his own wine fabrication industry, and wine tanks and that sort of thing, but he's also one of the most prolific still builders in Australia. He's a good mate of mine, Mark Burns, but he also has his own distillery. So he released his product not so long ago, which is... let's get this right. So if you see that over there eventually, you definitely get some of that. So, so I drink his whiskey. He drinks my whiskey, and I make my whiskey on my still, which he built. And it's really cool having a mate who's a still builder and a distiller, because he gets the whole process, which is cool. So there's a long answer. If I was answering that question honestly, mine would be that long too. So it's always something new, Here's an interesting question. Colin McKenzie, who's a friend of ours in Dufton, said, are there any records and interesting stories about illicit distilling in Oz? And was there much immigrant influence from the Scots? That's a really interesting question. Yes. I think it's fair to say that the majority of Australian distillers are influenced by Scottish distillers and Scottish history, for sure. There was a lot of Scotsmen in Australia. If I go to a specific example, there's mate of mine, husband and wife team. They're Spanish. They've got a distillery called Joaja Distillery. And Joaja was a historic site, and it was shale mining. And what they did is the Scottish, a lot of Scottish immigrants there, they had illicit still operations there. And in some quirky nature, because of that, Georgia was zoned as a legal spot down the track for a distillery. So hence, there is a legal distillery there called Georgia Distillery, which is Valero Annalisa's distillery, which is pretty cool. Pretty cool when you go and stand there and go, well, this was an illicit spot where some Scotsmen decided to make whiskey, and now it's an established distillery.
Yeah, that is cool.
Yeah.
I never. It's funny. I never until that's a great question, Colin, because I never gave any thought. I always think of Scotland in terms of illicit distilling, and to some degree, Kentucky there was a lot of illicit distilling, but probably still is, but I never thought about it elsewhere. So it's back to your Isla. You were talking about Isla a minute ago. I'm not exactly sure how you first became friends or friendly with Rachel.
You want to know the story?
Sure. Yeah. I'd love it.
Okay, so two things that happened to me that put me on my whiskey journey. So the first one was a good friend. This is early 2000, late 1990s, early 2000. Good friend of mine, a guy called Derek Taylor, was trying to introduce me to whiskey, and he loved it with a passion, and I hated it with a passion. Absolutely hated it with a passion. Didn't matter what he did, I'm just not interested. And then one day he said, go and just buy a bottle and stick with it. So I did. It was a green bottle. It was an Isla bottle. I can't remember what it was. And again, I hated it with a passion. Unfortunately, he passed away. And when he passed away, his family thought I was a whiskey lover. So they gave me his small collection at home. And so I sat down one night and I lined up all the bottles. And as a tribute to Derek, I was drinking them and tasting them. And that's when I had that first moment, that spark of curiosity. Was going, well, bugger me, this is like wine. These are all different. So it started to put me on my journey of exploration. The next thing that happened is I attended a Bruichladdich masterclass. And the guy at the front just exuded so much passion and the story of the resurrection of Bruichladdich. And with Jim McEwen coming on board and Mark Rainier and what they did. And that ignited my passion. So I became an avid Bruichladdich fan. And so for years, I didn't drink anything other than Bruichladdich because there was such a vast array of whiskies you could buy, flavor profile, from within the Bruichladdich stable. So I got to know Rachel through Bruichladdich, my passion for Bruichladdich, because I was very vocal about it. And Rachel started following me very, very early on the piece. And for me, what I do, I'm very much into the storytelling and the transparency of what is whiskey making. And to the point, I coined a phrase a while back called humanizing the art of whiskey. So the idea is just to make it accessible to the average man on the street. And we do that. And I think it just resonated with Rachel. We're very, very like-minded. We talk a lot, and she's just an awesome person of passion and love of the craft. So we developed a great friendship from that over quite a few years now. And I think that goes back to I started as an independent bottler, in fact, in 2015. So I think it was about 2016 I got to know Rachel around then. So, yeah, a lot of it's been built on the love of Bruichladdich, the wonder of Bruichladdich, and she's got a personal relationship with Jim McEwen as well, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And, that's why time and time again, when she and I would discuss doing it right, she was always quick to mention you. long before I had crossed paths with you digitally or anything. It's funny. Every week I tell my guests I'm going to talk for half an hour, and every week I go over. So if you have to run, let me know. It's already over. But I have one more question for you, but I'll hold off on that because I do see that there's another question in the chat here. Are there any spirits that are native or unique to Australia? For instance, there's a product called Seco, really an overproof rum kind of thing that's unique to Panama. I'll tell you a quick thing before you answer that, because you're going to know way better than I do. But I do know one thing. Lachlan, who I mentioned earlier, they've been making gin with Lantana. They've been making a Lantana gin, which is very uniquely Australian, because and he talked to me about the challenges of making gin with Lantana in it, because Lantana is so frequently seen as just a weed. And he's actually was working with a guy who is his name is Pete, and he's a forager and was making all kinds of vinegars out of different native Australian botanicals and things. And it was just really interesting about them, this kind of movement of not a traditional movement, but rather using traditional ingredients or native ingredients to create spirits.
Yeah, it's I'll answer it on two fronts. I'll answer it on the gin front, and then I'll answer it on the whiskey front. So on the gin front, as you would know, there's a worldwide just gin movement going on, and it's incredible what's happening on gin. In Australia, gin is just exploding in popularity, and there's a style called contemporary gin, which is less juniper. Juniper's there in the backbone, but it's less dominant. And what that is allowing to happen is distillers explore different flavour profiles, and a lot of Australian botanicals are being used in gin. I know myself, the gin that we make is got wattle seed, which is a certain it's a native in Australia. So it's exciting to see what you can use. There's just an absolute plethora of Australian botanicals. So that's going on the gin front. On the whiskey front, there is a distillery called, bear with me, Adelaide Hills, and they came out with a native grain whiskey a while ago. And it was quite controversial because it wasn't a cereal grain, but it was a massive flavoured whiskey. And they've changed their approach now. They're using something which is an Australian native, and is the cereal grain. I can't remember what it is off the top of my head, but that's a case of a distillery just really pushing the envelope and going, well, what can we use Australian, and what can we make as a unique style of whiskey? And they've released other whiskies too, using basically just Australian malts, Australian barleys, and big, rich, dominant malty flavors. So, yeah, it's exciting. There's all different expressions. And as I said earlier, Australians are not shy. Give it a go. See what happens.
That seems to be sort of the national personality of Australia, right? Not just in spirits, but I spent a couple of summers backpacking around Europe when I was young, and I always would wind up traveling with Australians, and all of them always seemed to be, oh, I've been doing this for the last 6 months, as opposed to like people who would do it for 2 weeks or something. And I always assumed that part of that was just the natural kind of the national personality, and part of it was just the distance they had to go to get there in the first place. They may as well commit to it.
It's a bit of a national pilgrimage. The young go to Europe and do a year or whatever over there, working in pubs or whatever, and vice versa. The Poms come down here, so it's backwards and forwards. And New Zealand as well.
So I see that the question we got before was from Dave Kuhn, and then he asked, or he said, a less juniper gin would be a welcome thing to my palate.
Okay, I'll make a recommendation if you can find it. Husband and wife team, 30-40 square meter shed. They've just won world's best contemporary gin at the International Whisky and Spirits Comp in the UK. And they're in their early 30s, contemporary gin, Karoo Distillery, absolutely just smashing it out the park with their lightning gin, a Navy strength gin. So Karu, if you can see that around, definitely get your hands on that.
Cool. Well, so actually that's a perfect setup for my last question I had for you, which is, tell me about your current distribution and your distribution plans. And then baked into that question is, when can I get some?
Well, we're very, very small. So I started in 2015 independent bottling, and I have independent bottling casks which come out, and they're generally one cask, maybe two casks, and then my own product, which have been distilling since 2017. So we're very, very small. So right now, distribution is basically cellar door, online. I've got a good solid community that follow what we do because we're storytelling and they love that. So it's accessible. And then independent bottle shops around the place, and then markets. And that's really all we're at this stage. Export is something definitely want to do down the track. I went to the US. I'll tell you a story. So you'll love this. So I don't know how it happened. I can't even remember. But I was invited to Whiskey Live in New York and Washington. And I went over and I was with Cameron Symes from Lime Burners, well-established distillery in Australia, and also John Rochefort, McLaren Vale Distillery. It was an established distillery. They had product. I didn't have product. All I had was a bottle of new make and some work in progress. So I'm at Whiskey Live, and I'm set up at Whiskey Live with no stock, just basically two bottles. I was the quirky Australian that was walking out in the crowd and going, "Hey guys, have you tried Australian whiskey?" I was like, "No, Australia makes whiskey? Yes, come and have a look." So we created a bit of a buzz at the show because we were the quirky Australians, and I was the quirky one because I didn't actually have any product. It was all work in progress stuff. So, but the feedback I got back then was phenomenal. The response was great, and ever since then, people are saying, "When can we buy your product in the US?" And it's like, if I had enough product, I would, and hopefully one day I get to that point. So yeah, that'd be cool. But what I do want to do, absolutely, depending on what happens in 2022, is go to the US. There's a number of distilleries I'd love to visit, and if I do that, I'll bring a suitcase or something over, hopefully.
Well, nice. I will look you up then. I may be in Australia before then, so we shall see. That's cool. Some of the things we know. We're eager to. We're moving some of our online events more westward from where we are, east around the world, but westward from where we are to Asia. We're Singapore, Japan, Taiwan, and hopefully Australia, New Zealand. Once the world keeps kind of opening up a bit more and more. So. Yeah. And before we go, I know also we're doing this thing that's coming up that you're speaking at that, yes, with Luke Lawler. Oh yes, yeah. No, that's going to be a great honor. Yeah. So the movie. Yeah. So it's a little theater, a beach theater, an old style theater. So we're going to be doing a bit of a Works Whisky tasting with the crowd. I did it once before, a couple of years ago. And basically premiered the film, and so I'm doing it with Luke. It was actually meant to be this month, but because we're in lockdown over here in Sydney, it's everything's been delayed by a month. But super excited. The film is incredible. It just drips passion. It's everything about Jim, and Jim is such an influential character on the world stage, and I say to people, if you've not done that warrior toast with Jim, with one foot on a table, one foot on a wonky chair, you haven't lived. It's a big deal. Yeah, it is something else. Yeah, congrats. It was an awesome film. It really was. Thank you very much. And this goes to show you how shit I am at promoting things, because I forgot to even mention that event until we're done. I'm just look, I'm like you. I'm inspired by the stories, and I'm passionate about them and telling them. But I don't do it in a strategic way. I lead with my heart, not on a checklist. And so that's hopefully why people watch this. That's hopefully why people watch the film and respond to the film. And hopefully that seems like that's why people like your whiskeys. So I think we're doing it right. I think so. Awesome. Well, I will let you go, and I'm going to go keep on driving across the country. I'm just getting started. I'm heading the whole way across the country over the next week. So this is just step one. Right. Well, thank you so much for your time, man.
How long's your drive today? How long's your drive
today's
today?
actually short. Today's just like 3 hours, and then the next day is 10, and then we're gonna do at 8 after that. But today we're just going to visit someone else, so then we're shortening it up so we can spend time visiting.
Right, nice. Yeah.
Well, hopefully I get to talk to you again soon, man.
Yeah, no, I'd love to do it again. That was awesome. Enjoyed that.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Now I'll go and get the hot water out of the still and start brewing. Start my day.
Nice. Cool. All righty. Thanks.
No
Talk to
worries.
you soon.
See you guys.
Bye, everyone.